Hello everyone and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazell and this is Dev Dive, a show where I get a chance to talk to interesting game developers about their games, and today I am joined by Dan Pearce working on the game Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 with Strange Scaffold. Strange Scaffold, you might remember, is the studio that Xavier Nelson kind of heads up. I talked to him a couple months ago about their game I Am Their Beast. No, I Am Your Beast. And they are already back with another game. And Dan actually worked on I Am Your Beast as well. So we've got a nice little synergy going on there. But Dan, thank you for joining me to talk about this totally bizarre game that I've never talked to anyone with a game like this before. And so I'm really excited to sort of dig into everything unique that went into Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want to start by having you introduce yourself a little bit. I was actually planning on having this interview with Xavier, and so I had to sort of reformat my questions. Be like, nah, I already had him on this show, you know? Like, I don't need to ask all the questions about him, but I've never talked to you before. This is the first time you and I are meeting, and so I want you to give the audience a little bit of insight into who you are as a game developer and what your history with game development is.
Sure. I'm Dan Pearce. I'm a programmer designer. I have been working in the games industry for about half my life now. I got a really early break into the games industry with something called BAFTA YGD, which is sort of like spotlighting young people in games. And then my career kind of blossomed out of that. I ran my own small studio for about 8 or 9 years. Made a game called 10-Second Ninja. Actually, prior to that, released a small game after dropping out of university, which was called Castles in the Sky, and that got a BAFTA nomination. So I got a lot of luck and good fortune right out of the gate, very early on in my career. You could argue I peaked way too early. Turns out running a studio's really, really difficult. So for the past few years, I've been doing sort of freelance game development, theoretically for a bunch of different companies, but mostly for Strange Scaffold, where I've worked on, I'm Your Beast, did a little bit of work on Clickholding last summer as well, and very recently, Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3, which is a match 3 survival horror, Metroidvania genre. It's a very confusing game.
Yes, and we'll definitely get into that. So, talking about you finding your way to Strange Scaffold and working on a couple of their projects, let's narrow in on Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3, which, I don't know, do you have a shorthand for this game? First off, let's talk about the name a little bit. Do you have a shorthand name for this game so you don't have to say the entire thing to each other? What should we call it when we're talking in the interview?
We just call it CRDM3 constantly.
Okay.
Which you would think would make it easier, but
Still pretty long.
It's still pretty long, and also for people who aren't super familiar with the name, like we have friends and family and stuff, who trying to remember which letter goes where, the amount of times people are like, oh, how is like CDMR3, and then you have to be like, Creep Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3.
Yeah, come on, guys. Yeah, well, the name is really interesting because in a similar vein to another Strange Scaffold game, which is an airport for aliens currently run by dogs, there seems to be this idea that you can make your game's name basically anything. And as long as there's an interesting enough premise, people kind of get hooked in on it. So was there an element of that while you were first coming up with the idea for this game, that name being something that might have been like a peculiar draw for people of like, oh, what is that? That name is so weird.
Yeah, so the name was actually attached to the project before I even joined in. So I've known Xavier for quite a long time, and I kind of just assumed it was Xavier being Xavier. It's one of his, like an airport for aliens currently run by dogs. It's just like, of course he would call it that, and then I didn't really question it kind of beyond that. Weirdly, I think we only really started digging into why that would be the name, like, quite a ways into the project. I don't know what the kind of genesis of it being 3 was originally. The project got like restructured numerous times. Like, ironically, this version of the project is kind of my third iteration of how it's structured.
So it really is Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 in some secret way.
In a very meta way, it has become the joke that it was supposed to be about, very unironically. We hit a point kind of midway through production where we had to restructure the project again. And we were trying to figure out how the story was going to work. Basically, all of the artwork in the game, with like a few exceptions, had already been commissioned by that point. So we knew we wanted to use as much of it as possible. And when you've got a really wide array of bits and pieces of artwork, and some of that is like dinosaurs with flowing blonde hair, this professor as a baby, you've got characters with jigsaw puzzle pieces for heads, like you've got all of this stuff. Trying to find a narrative concept, like context, that can justify all of those things existing within that space without it just seeming kind of random was really, really hard, because we were having to do that backwards. And that's when we started really digging into like, okay, well, what were Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mentions 1 and 2 about? And is there something there? Like, can these be referencing material in those games, which, to be clear, do not exist?
Yes.
And then we use that as kind of like a jumping off point to figure out what all these art pieces were. Because originally a lot of them were kind of sort of dreamt up by Zalavir in an attempt to kind of be like, this will be interesting. Surely interesting gameplay scenarios and story ideas will come out of this. And then we're looking at this really like complicated, very eclectic range of characters and backgrounds and things like that. And we're going, what is this game? What is this game? What is this story? How does any of this fit together?
Well, I think that's an interesting place to have us sort of settle back into introducing this game to people, because it is really weird. It's unique. It's just genre-bending, very strangely titled, really strange concept game that on all levels is not really like things that I've played before. And so I want to talk about the genre of this game as a match 3 puzzle game, which people are largely familiar with, but it also has some visual novel elements, and you call it a Metroidvania, which means there's a map that you kind of explore and you can buy. There's a shop and there's characters to interact with. And so it is combining a bunch of different sort of things that create a very unique experience. And so when you are like trying to describe this game to people, what is your sort of small scale pitch of what this game is on a genre or gameplay level that might help people understand just on base level what it actually is?
So I tend to go with it's a match 3 survival horror Metroidvania.
You go with that. Doesn't really help, but you go
Doesn't
with
really
that.
help, but it means that people can start pulling on the thread.
Sure.
So the survival horror aspect is less of a gameplay thing. Originally, it was supposed to be a lot more directly, like, mechanically a survival horror game.
Sure.
That was one of the many things that kind of changed, but the context stayed the same. Like the setup is you have this kind of very Resident Evil 1 style premise of like you're exploring this like creepy mansion where science experiments have been done.
A creepy redneck dinosaur mansion.
Of course. And then the Metroidvania bit is the thing that's both more and less telling. So typically you'll say it's a Metroidvania and then people go, what is that? And you go, it's a Metroidvania which houses match 3 mechanics. So I'd say one of the sort of unique mechanical elements of this game is we have a thing that is called the trait system. So when you perform certain actions in the game, you make certain choices in dialogues, whatever, your character, JJ Hardwell, will receive traits, which, for example, there's one which is like first aid, which means that he can, like, or first aid training, which means that he can do first aid. He can restore his health. And that unlocks certain actions for you, and it also unlocks further dialogues and things like that. But then there's also like much more dramatic ones. There's thief hands, like being a coward. You unlock certain dialogue options by being a coward. There's one which is just wondering whether you're secretly racist. That is set up with context that I'm not going to provide for you here. Just like a ton of like really weird things that essentially represent things that JJ has experienced and internalized on his journey, which mean that you unlock actions in either match 3s or you unlock dialogue options which allow you to further explore the mansion. And that's where the kind of Metroidvania aspect comes into it. There's lots of like locked doors, there's lots of paths that you can't go down until you unlock these traits. Many of the traits you unlock through doing match 3 puzzles. So it's a Metroidvania in that sense.
Sure, yeah. And so with the Troidvania part of the descriptor of this game, the game is structurally similar to a Metroidvania in that the items that you, or power-ups you would unlock in a Metroidvania are in this Metroidvania character traits and sort of elements of personality that JJ acquires across the course of the game. But what is different about it, and where I think that the describing it in any Troidvania fashion is a little bit of a stretch, is that it's really more of a visual novel exploration or a text-based adventure style exploration, where it's those character traits, and you're clicking on nodes on the map, or you're clicking on different options in the dialogue tree to then go down another pathway. And I find the trait system really, really fascinating, because I can see what you guys are attempting to have, like, a branching narrative with these different pathways, and give JJ a lot of different personality traits that, like, can put him in all sorts of wacky situations. But they're so vague, they're so random, all these different eclectic personality concepts that are the trait system. Talk about what it was like introducing a new trait into the game. What was the sort of intentionality where you were like, all right, we want JJ to experience this. How do we work that into a trait? How do we work that into the narrative? And then where do you choose to place certain traits in terms of areas on the map and what they unlock? Like, it's hard for me to wrap my head around designing that concept, because it's intermingling so many different ideas.
So that process, a lot of that was handled by our kind of writers and content designers. So that's Colin, Stav, and Nathan. And the process was chaotic. A lot of that process was them going, can we do this? Like, technically, can we do this? And me being like, we have to get this game out in April. There was like a lot of mechanics they wanted in the game, and the game also went through just like another massive restructure in, I think, like November. It's been a very quick turnaround with the Metroidvania thing. The Metroidvania thing only became part of the game really towards the end of last year.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The game prior to that was structured much more kind of traditionally, where we were going to have essentially chapters laid out in sequence with kind of like branching dialogues and like different outcomes and things.
Yeah.
But we did a playtest and people just didn't get it. It just didn't feel correct. And people sort of didn't really know where they were. It wasn't really clear whether they were supposed to be exploring every avenue or whether they were supposed to be like making decisions. We'd gone from the project being on hiatus for quite a while to suddenly like a lot of new people on the team and everyone contributing ideas at once. And then we ended up with a format that just felt quite confusing. So we landed on the Metroidvania format, and then the process of integrating traits and stuff became a lot more organized. So we put together this big like Miro board. I don't know if you know Miro, some people will, I'm sure. But it's basically just like a web interface for just structuring flowcharts, bits of information. It's really good for documentation if you want to do something that's very, very dense and complicated. And we basically just started mapping out the whole thing on there. So the content folks, so again, like Colin, Staff, Nathan, and Zalivera himself, would basically just go through and go like, okay, what trait happens in this chapter? What trait happens in this chapter? What we're expecting here? What we're expecting here? Where are the locks? Where are the keys? And then once we kind of had those structural pieces in place where we knew which were going to be essential for completing the game, then everyone just kind of went bananas with putting in everything they could. Like the amount of just like riffing. Mm-hmm. And just like, oh, we can have a trait that does this. Oh, JJ could say this. Oh, this character could give you this. And I think in the end, we've ended up with, I'm not sure what the exact count was by the time that the game launched, but I think there's close to like 100 traits. There might be more.
Yeah, sure.
There are just so many random things that you can pick up as JJ that inform who his character is and the experiences he's gone on through the course of the game.
Yeah. And as designer and programmer on the game, what was your involvement in the traits? Did you have any traits that you came up with? Was there any riffing that ended up turning into things that actually went into the game on your end?
I think some of mine might have actually slipped in, because I did a lot of sort of example content. Just things like, here are things that the game could be about. Just so everyone else kind of understood what the bounds were of the kind of content they could make, before they then immediately started pushing against those bounds, which they're supposed to do, but it's a nightmare for me because that's where everything breaks. I'll be honest, I have no idea which traits are mine. I think very few of them will be mine.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears a little bit into the unique development history of this game that you've referenced a couple times throughout this, but again, this game just came out. We haven't heard too much about the story behind it, and so that's what I really want to dig into, is when this project started development initially, from what you know. Again, you said you mentioned you joined the team partway through, but then it was restarted a couple of times, went on hiatus, was restructured in the end of last year. And so let's get a overall timeline of what the history of this project actually was to get it to where it was today.
Sure. So it's quite funny that the game itself, like the text of the game, is very much about a game that kind of wants to and doesn't want to exist. It's a little bit eerie how much the actual development of the game was like that. So when I joined the project, this was actually, I think it was around summer 2022. This was way back.
Okay.
And by that point, most of the artwork in the game was already done.
Oh, okay.
The project had already been started and made some headway under another programmer. It just kind of wasn't coming together. I think this was one of the projects from that kind of period of Strange Scaffold. Like that year was quite tough for the studio. I think that was one of the projects that was kind of frequently like maybe on the chopping block. I don't know if you've seen the excellent video by Noodle on Bass Reeves Can't Die, but like,
of course I did. Yeah, link that in the description, by the way.
An incredible video.
I loved it.
And Colin from that worked on CRDM3 as well and did an amazing job. When I was involved, Zaliva was basically trying to figure out whether or not to shelve the project completely or start it over, but like a lot of artwork had already been done and that felt like a waste. And basically when I came onto the project, I just kind of restarted the code base, rebuilt it from the ground up, tried to get a prototype with the match 3 mechanics working as soon as possible, and we actually made a really good headway really, really quick. And it seemed like that game was going to come together and ship pretty soon.
Yeah, a couple years ago.
Like 3 years ago. So that didn't happen. The main reason for that was I think the original kind of concept for the game was a little bit too big. It still had some kind of exploration like matching mechanics, but we were kind of finding the game as we went. We were struggling to find places for all of the content that had already been developed. Honestly, we were just struggling to get people to bite on the concept. I heard this through Zaliva, but like we frequently had the experience of showing the game to publishers and them going like, this is really, really fun. Like I could not put it down. We have no idea how to sell this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's where the restructures started happening. Because once we kind of realized how difficult it was going to be to get anyone to fund this game, it became apparent that the game also just had to be smaller, because it was like, okay, it's a hard enough sell doing a small version of this, let alone a version where we wanted to kind of push in all these directions. So I think around that time we restructured the game twice in significant ways. I think the last version we ended up with before the project eventually got shelved at the end of, no, it would have been like mid 2023, I think. The project got shelved. So it got about a year of development. By that point, the game was structured kind of like Outrun, where
I love Strange Scaffold. Oh my god.
You'd come to like match 3s where it's like, if you match these gems you go in this direction, if you match these you go in this direction. And then it was going to be like almost like a roguelike, but it was like there's going to be all these routes. So it's like you'd try and go down the A route and then the B route and the A route, and you were trying to find these different, that version of the game, which is funny to say this now, we were trying so hard to make sure it had as little text as possible in it.
Oh, okay.
Localization is expensive. We weren't sure if we were going to localize it, and when pitching to publishers, it was like, the text is going to make this too expensive. So we were trying to do a version of Creeper Redneck Dinosaur 3, which has so many things that are so bizarre, like content-wise, that I'm not sure that would have ever worked. I don't know that you can present half the stuff in this game without context or justification through text.
Sure.
You can't just present some of the images in this game and be like, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Like you need a wrapper, you know? So that was when it was coming up to the point where it just seemed like continuing the development of that game would put Strange Scaffold in an even more precarious position. This was around when like Bass Reeves got cancelled. This was around when El Paso Elsewhere was just about to come out. I'm Your Beast had been cancelled at that point. Mm-hmm. This before it got rebooted later. It was a very precarious time, and the game had just gone through a ton of iterations to try and get it to to work for publishers in any kind of capacity, and it just wouldn't. So we shelved it, and it was only when kind of Beast got picked up again through our publisher Frosty Pop, we kind of saw that out the door. That was received really, really well. And it was just when I was kind of wrapping up on that project that I started getting messages from Zalavir being like, hey, like, we might have a way to do this again. Like, would you be interested? Like, do you wanna like essentially finish Beast and then pick up on CRDM 3 again? And I was so down. Like, I just wanted that game to come out. When he explained the kind of new premise of that game, which would be it being a game that didn't want to see the light of day, that was really struggling to just get made. That felt really, really right, both for that project in specific, because it had gone through so many iterations, and when it got picked back up again, was going through another iteration and then had one more significant iteration after that. It felt very right, and also with where the industry was at, especially, it felt like a story that we all had a personal stake in.
Sure, yeah, because the narrative in a non-spoilery sense is on a meta level about the difficulty of game development, and the game covers bugs and covers all these things of like changing narratives, and the designers didn't want to put this in there, but it's still, in the base code somewhere if you kind of dig. And so then it kind of ends up also being like an exploration of the psyche of game development and the complicated nature of working on a project and feeling like maybe this isn't working, maybe I want to make sure this happens. Once the narrative, as you mentioned sort of late last year, becomes an element that is a strong creative direction for this game to go, how did that then end up impacting the way that you designed and structured the game, whether that's through the battles or through the Metroidvania structure of the map and things? What was it like tying in that really distinct narrative that, again, allows you so much freedom when you're actually designing the game on a more gameplay level?
But essentially, like, coming back to the project after having a year of not interacting with it at all, in the run-up to that hiatus, I developed a lot of content to sort of, like, example content, to be like, here are things that the game could potentially do. We did a lot of experimentation. There was a lot of this stuff. And then in the year away from it, I essentially just forgot all of that. I forgot everything that I'd done. You know, we really had to hit the ground running on I'm Your Beast. So any portion of my brain that was sort of retaining stuff about CRDM 3 was completely filled with Beast stuff. From my perspective, a lot of what we were doing was coming back to the project. Again, like Colin, Nathan, Stav, all came in. They were brand new to the project, and a lot of my experience was sort of saying, like, rooting through the files and going, what did we make? Like what was here before? What kind of things can we do? And the amount of times that one of them would sort of say, like, oh, could we do this mechanic? Could we have an encounter that kind of worked like this? Where I'd go like, oh, we have that already.
Yeah.
we did a version of that actually. And then I could go and dig it up, and I'd sort of dust it off because it would be broken in some kind of way. And also just like all those folks essentially browsing through the files and just finding stuff and going like, does this mechanic work the way I think it does? And then me being like, oh yeah, no, we do have that. That can go in the game, sure. Yeah, so it almost felt almost a little bit more like excavation, and then just trying to find new ways to kind of recontextualize a lot of the work that had already been done, essentially.
It's kind of fun. It's like that classic story about archaeology where the archaeologists were finding dinosaur bones and making them into these like hideous monstrosities of different combined dinosaurs because they didn't know what the actual dinosaurs were supposed to look like.
That is such a good metaphor, for the development of this game. That is so on point. I wish we'd known that pre-release because that would have been really helpful for marketing.
Yeah, and you're welcome to use it in the future if you'd like.
Appreciate that.
But I really like the idea and the story behind this of picking up the pieces and trying to figure out with a fresh set of eyes after a big break from working on the game what actually these pieces could be used for, especially with that new narrative thrust. And I'm curious on you with that break that you took and working on Beast, working on other projects, what experience did you gain working on games that are nothing like Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 that you were able to learn and apply to a fresh look at this match 3 game? You'd worked on a really fast-paced FPS, some other things before returning to this. Was there anything you learned that you were able to then apply to making this game in its completed state?
Yeah, I mean, the game like became a lot juicier when we came back. I mean, the game was already like pretty juicy. We had like a lot of feedback. I'm very big on feedback, even in like interface heavy games like this. But particularly coming straight back from an FPS, it was like, okay, we want to make sure that all of this like really hits. Like matching symbols should feel like it sounds dumb, but it should feel like kind of badass. Like it should feel like genuinely cool. I think there are a lot of people who have reservations around this genre.
Yeah, sure. Especially in the hardcore gaming space, absolutely.
Yeah, which I mean, this is one of the reasons why the game struggled to get picked up for so long. And one of our kind of ways around that was like, okay, if we can just make it so that the base interaction of matching these gems feels amazing, then that's going to do a lot of the work for us. Like it's applying Halo methodology of like 30 seconds of fun. If you can get a 30-second game loop and have that feeling fun, that can survive the whole game. Like the game can just last on that. And we applied that to this, where it's like, even if you're not even fully paying attention, you should be able to match gems and just your brain should be happy. So that was a really, really big help from coming from Beast. But I'd say honestly, like the biggest change was just restraint. I personally had a lot to prove on Beast. It was sort of my first larger release since we had Clickholding just before it, but I was sort of minimally involved in that. And it was the first release that I'd worked on since a project a few years ago, which did not turn out well and was very taxing on me.
Sure.
On Beast, like I was really trying to kind of prove that I could make the right calls, not be too overambitious or be ambitious in the areas where that was going to make the most impact. Have a game that was like pretty lean but pretty impactful. I think Beast really, really delivered on that. And coming back to CRDM 3, I think I had a much more discerning lens with which to make decisions about the design of the game and what was too much, what was too little, what would really meaningfully benefit the game. And honestly, the Metroidvania structure was part of that. That was like probably one of the biggest design challenges on that game, because like I say, we only decided on that in November last year. We knew we had to ship in April, like 5 months with a Christmas break in the middle as well.
Yeah, of course.
So it's like 5 months to technically implement and then deliver on this complete restructure, which has never been, I think, attempted before in this kind of context.
Sure, I agree with that, yeah.
That was one of those things where it's like, okay, I have to really, really know what I'm doing. I have to be smart about this, because I was pitching the Metroidvania structure when we were kind of all panicking about how we were going to get this game to actually land after the playtest didn't go well. I'd say that's still probably the thing I'm proudest on in CRDM 3, was just like pitching that structure, it making sense, and being able to deliver on that within the time frame that we had. It sounds kind of roundabout, but it came from Beast. It came from like just months and months of being on that project and training up the muscle in my brain that was getting better and better at making those kinds of calls. And I think it really paid off. Like I think the structure really works and was very liberating for the people filling that in with content.
Sure. Yeah. And you mentioned these different genres. This is, again, as we've said, a genre blend of different ideas and concepts that haven't really been done in this way before. And I'm curious for you, as a game player and someone with a history with games, these different genres that this game is mashing together. We talk about the visual novel aspect. We talk about the Metroidvania style exploration, and of course the match 3 puzzle games. You can choose which one of those 3 routes we want to go down first. But what is your experience with these genres, and was there any games that you are personally a fan of in any of these areas that you then were able to take inspiration from and apply it to making a game that, again, is really nothing like these other projects you've worked on?
I think far and away the biggest one was probably just Puzzle Quest. I think that's sort of like the cleanest reference point for what this game is doing. It's doing a lot of different things. Like it very much invests in structurally its mechanics to kind of suggest a world that is a lot bigger than these actual match 3 encounters would kind of imply on their own. Me and Zalaver both have like very similar kind of fixations when it comes to games. We both have very eclectic game taste.
Yeah.
And Puzzle Quest is one of those where we're both very, very big fans of economic mechanical devices. So I think the appeal in Puzzle Quest is going like, oh, even though I'm matching gems, I do feel like I'm fighting a skeleton.
Sure.
or like, oh, I do feel like this enemy has a distinct personality just through the mechanical twist that it puts on this kind of encounter. And essentially what CRDM3 is taking that idea and going, what if that was every single verb we can think of?
Yeah,
What if
sure.
that's hacking a computer? What if that's like reading a book? What if that, like you're climbing a gate? The genesis of that definitely came from Puzzle Quest and how well it kind of articulates these sort of typical RPG battle systems through just match 3.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And that is, I think, the thing that surprised me as well. When I was playing this game and didn't know how deep it would go or how I would feel about playing a match 3 puzzle game, which I have some experience with, but I've never personally gotten like hyper invested in one. And what was most interesting to me, and what I think on a design level I find most interesting, is how the different battle types feel as a player, even if mechanically you are ultimately, clicking and dragging. Like, you're not really doing too much different on a mechanics level. But when you're matching hacker computer nodules or guns or knives, and those contribute to the different skills that you've unlocked because of the exploration and the Metroidvania elements. And then there are items that you can use that then change the battlefield a little bit or directly impact your opponent. And then the other element that I think is, to your point, gives the opponents or the enemies personalities is that they have different ways that they control the board and speeds at which they attack. And so I'm curious about that process of coming up with different battle types. When you were approaching designing a new battle, what was the first thing you started with when you were coming up with the next guy that you're going to fight? Was it the enemy type? Was it the battle type? And then how did you sort of match and tweak mechanics and pacing to make sure that it felt distinct from the ones before it?
Sure. So a lot of credit for this actually goes to Colin. My role in this was largely just sort of putting a lot of these mechanics together kind of in isolation and abstract, and then giving them to him and being like, make these entertaining, like find a context where it's entertaining.
Oh,
So
sure.
for example, like we had a mechanic like when you're matching symbols, typically they go into your bank, you can matching symbols and then use them in the game in some kind of way. Like it's just an action that like you could do or an enemy could do. So like that's essentially me going like, here is a mechanic. There's probably a context or like a combination of mechanics where this will be really interesting. I don't know what that is.
Sure.
Colin, you're weirder than I am. Can you do something with that?
Yeah.
And then Colin would make a fight like I think there's a few fights in the game like this actually using that mechanic. But there's one where you're throwing paintings at a bird, like a kind of bird dinosaur.
Yep. Remember
Yeah,
that one.
it's infuriating.
Not infuriating if you bring a couple like shotguns and pistols with you and just deal a ton of damage.
So this is the thing. This is where I think the magic of the game kind of lies, because you essentially have a scenario which kind of makes sense, where it's like, okay, you're in a room full of paintings. Your actions are stuff like throw painting at this bird because it's flying around. You can't reach it.
Yeah.
And the bird has an action which is draining your symbols. So you're trying desperately to get enough symbols so you can just throw these goddamn paintings. And this bird is constantly preventing you from doing that.
Yeah, because narratively, or context-wise, the bird is flapping around and being like crazy and chaotic, and so it makes it harder for you to hit it, and that's why you have less action points.
Right.
So it does make sense in terms of like the tenor of the battle. I actually really do distinctly remember that one.
Yeah, and I think that kind of gesturing at stuff is where the game's really, really powerful, and something that Colin is just like specifically really, really good at doing is essentially coming up with these things where even though what you're still just doing the match threes, it's almost like reading like an engrossing book where your brain's still conjuring the imagery of what is actually going on, and the mental image of JJ trying and failing to hurl paintings at this bird is just really, really inherently funny, and that's told all through mechanics. You're not being told like, and then JJ picked up a painting, but oh no, it's like a very broad improv quality to how these things all kind of stack together, where by looking at what traits you have, what actions those are tied to, what these actions called, and the mechanics of them, you start in your own head like conjuring up this really, really funny imagery of what this battle is, how this battle is improvised, and like kind of break the context of that by just bringing in like 3 pocket shotguns
Yeah.
that you've bought at the shop and just obliterating this bird. I think that's where like the most fun stuff happens, and most of the creative process of putting those together was coming up with individual context for individual battles that could be supported by just like really simple action names that tell a story, and then also rewarding the player with actions and items that essentially like sew punchlines into those different contexts.
Sure. And the traits are actually a big part of that, right? Is when you pick a dialogue option or you complete a battle, and it's like, I'm just coming up with one. I actually don't even remember if this is one that's actually in the game, but it's like, JJ shat his pants and he unlocked like, poopy pants trait or whatever. Like, and then it's like, oh, he has like a stinky
and that
ability.
that is like a button on that moment. Like, it's not just like, oh, this weird things happen. When you get the pop-up at the top, which is like, this is a thing that defines you now. I think there's so much like great comedy in the game that's seeded into that. And I can say that as well because I didn't write a lot of it. So
Sure.
I can just appreciate that as a fan.
I want to tie this into the I'm Your Beast interview that I did with Xalavier a couple months ago. One thing that he mentioned when he was talking about that game is one of Strange Scaffold's design philosophies that he really champions is thinking about what does the game need, and sort of following the design language of the game as you explore what a mechanic will support the core concept. And so I'm curious if he shares that philosophy with you, if you also then apply that to the work that you're doing, and if there was anything while working on CDRM3 that CRDM3. I
easily
messed
done.
it up there for a second. That came out of following what the game needed, and then I'm making that a element of the game.
Sure. So I think obviously the Metroidvania structure is a good example of that, of just finding a structure for this game and actually figuring out what the game needed was really, really hard. We didn't have to worry about that too much when it came to just like the core mechanics. Thankfully, stuff like the actions you use and the match 3 mechanics, and just like the concept of like having this kind of bank of actions that expands over the course of the game and all stuff, all that just kind of worked immediately. That didn't actually need a lot of iteration, and in fact gave us probably an overinflated sense of how easy the rest of the development was going to be really early on, because It was just like, well, it's a match 3 game and the match 3 is fun, so we're probably like nearly done. Cut to 3 years later. Most of it just came from a place of trying to avoid content bloat. We developed tools for building this game that allowed encounters to be built really, really quickly. Once you know how, like, what you want the mechanics of a match 3 encounter to be, actually implementing that in an engine takes like as little as 5 minutes. Like, it's really quick.
Interesting.
But
Wow.
Then obviously you have to playtest it, you have to balance it, you have to think about where it is in the wider context of the game and all this kind of stuff. We really designed for the game telling us what it needed. Was, in this case, more about designing for what it didn't need. I think it would be really easy to kind of bloat and panic and add things into this, especially because it's in a genre that people can typically be a bit resistant to. I think it would be easy to kind of knee-jerk and add in a bunch of mechanics that the game didn't need to kind of compensate for the people who wouldn't be entirely on board with it, rather than just committing and going like,
Sure.
no, we're going to do all of this within the framework of a match 3 and we're just going to make sure that's really, really fun. Something that Xalavier is really, really good at balancing is he's very good at just making decisions, like, very quickly. The amount of designers I know who, and I'm guilty of this as well, trying to get better at it, but who will just and ah over decisions forever. Rather than just going like, we're moving in this direction. If it's the wrong direction, we'll pivot as we go. We'll find that out. But the worst thing you can do is just sort of stay put. Another thing that designers can typically do is they're so worried about just committing to a direction that they will spend forever fleshing out in great detail what this whole big shape of the game is going to be in a very inflexible way. And then they present all of that at once and go, and now we just have to make all of it.
You gotta fill in the holes, but it's really just one gigantic hole.
Right, it's just like all of this. But and I think when you approach games with that kind of
philosophy,
yeah, you end up with a situation where you've designed to a 10 and actually a 5 would have been like more than enough. And I don't mean that in terms of like quality. I mean just like, say we built out a game where it had 60 encounters and then we started implementing them or playtesting it and we're like, oh, this game would feel like enough with 20. you don't want to make 60 then like that, because that's just a waste. You could be making other games with that time, and if it's not going to make that much difference to the player, it's better to make something that's very lean and very concise than just going as big as possible or doing as many mechanics as possible or whatever. Like, I think it's really easy to end up with a game that's just bloated if you do that, and a game that is not sort of cohesive and kind of lacks its own identity. I think stopping when you know that you have enough is really, really important. And in CRDM 3, a lot of that was just getting that balance right of how much of this can just be match 3 mechanics and what kind of content do we need to support that while still having a game that's ultimately fulfilling and feels like decently sized.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So to wrap up this interview, there's one final thing that I want to talk about is your eclectic taste in games that you mentioned a couple times here. I want to give you a little bit of a platform, a little soapbox to evangelize a game or two that you find really interesting, very eclectic, that speaks to your taste, that you want people to know about a little bit more. Is there anything that comes to mind of like, oh man, I really love this game and I want to make sure I share this with people?
My favorite thing is if I'm playing something that I'm unsure about, because I like many people at Strange Scaffold, funnily enough, I've got ADHD. And that means that like very frequently I'll just sit and I'll jump between like 20 different games over the course of an afternoon because I'm just trying to find the one that kind of hooks in properly. And I enjoy that process. I enjoy trying lots of different things and kind of getting an idea of what different games are doing and then kind of moving along. My favorite thing is when I'm kind of intending to do that and just play through a bunch of stuff, and then I get so hooked by something that I just lock in and I don't put it down, and then the whole day's gone. And I almost feel guilty. I almost feel like I've wasted it, but I'm like, nah, this was really, really good. And a game that did that for me pretty recently was Lunacid. I haven't finished it yet, but I fully intend to. For people who don't know, it's really kind of riffing on kind of Kingsfield and like the older FromSoft catalog, but it's got such a good flavor. It's so moody, really, really atmospheric. It feels like a little bit opaque in the way that older games do, but it's like just good enough at kind of keeping you moving through it that you can like still move forwards. And I'm really, really picky when it comes to games that are kind of evoking an older style. Like I'm one of those people where if I see a game with pixel art and the pixels aren't all like 100% sort of consistently sized, I find it really grating because I'm like, no, because games that you're like the games you're referencing didn't look like that. Like I'm so like annoying about it. Lunacid's one of the few where I'm just like, oh no, this feels exactly right. This feels how those games feel. But doing that in a context where it does still feel really, really fresh, really, really new. It's not awkward to play in the way that those are. It's just a really, really good time. It's an incredible game to like turn the lights off and just really get into. I'd recommend it to anyone. It's a really, really good game.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for sharing some stories about this game, which has a totally fascinating development history, which I think resulted in a very, very unique project. I'm really happy with the work that you guys have been putting out. I love the fact that you're experimenting and trying different genres and stuff. And Strange Scaffold actually has another game coming out in just a couple of
it never
weeks.
Stops.
So, it's the grind never stops.
I'm at least not working on that one, so I can have a small break.
And then you can appreciate it from afar. You're like, oh, hey, that's pretty cool.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tactical Takedown. If you haven't played the demo for that, so good. Like, I'm so impressed with what that part of the studio is doing.
But I implore everyone to check out CRDM 3, which I'll leave a link to the Steam store in the description if you'd like to purchase it. And of course, make sure to follow Strange Scaffold on their Steam page, on all their social media, to make sure that you're keeping up with all of their releases, because they're doing some of the most interesting work in the industry. Dan, thank you very much for joining me, for sharing all of your stories and inspirations, and I'm very glad. Whoa, what the hell did I just...
You're doing so well.
It was glad and happy in one word. What the hell was that? I'm very happy to have you. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me.